Hello, everybody. I'm Hal,
And I'm Melanie.
and we want to welcome you to another episode of Making Biblical Family Life Practical. What do you do about a child who is accident-prone and always seems to be breaking things?
You know, I think all kids go through an accident-prone phase.
And, we had one this morning. We had a very dramatic one this morning. And
One of our preteens went to get something out of the refrigerator and somehow ended up with stuff all over the kitchen.
Something fell over and it knocked over something else and it hit the floor and there was breakage and upset
During
and
the
alarm
preteen
and stuff.
years,
Yes.
they go through a growth spurt and their hands and feet aren't in the places they expect them to be. And so they tend to get really accident prone. And some kids are just accident prone. But that accident prone thing tends to maximize during times that they're having growth spurts.
Right. And that's a real question. And it's one of those things where, we can look around and say, it's broken. And I don't really care how it happened. The fact is, the result is a broken thing, whatever it was, or a damaged thing. Well, that's true. And that has to be dealt with. But
I think the very first thing you have to do is take a deep breath.
That's true of a lot of life, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
But rule number one, don't freak out and this is hard for me because there are things that are really important to me. Mm-hmm. And when they get broken, I have to remind myself that this is not my home, that heaven is my home. And this is just stuff, and that my kids are more important than my stuff.
And we are stewards of this stuff. It doesn't ultimately belong to us. It's God's stuff. But that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
That's hard, and that sounds very pious and holy. And I can't always say that I attain that.
No, sometimes I have to pray. So take a deep breath. Yeah. Pray if you need to. Get some perspective.
Yeah.
And then we have to kind of triage what happened here.
Well, and you know what? One of the most important early lessons I got in parenting was from James Dobson. He said, you got to make a distinction between acts of rebellion and childish irresponsibility. And really? I think he really pointed out, I think even before we had children, we saw that on a video series that he did, where it really pointed out there's a difference. Although the result might be the same, there's a big wide range between something that happened just because they're a kid and kids do dumb things versus somebody who was really being malicious.
Well, there's kind of 3 levels of this that I've seen in our house.
Okay.
The worst and the clearest is the child who's angry and breaks something because they're mad. Maybe they were trying to hurt somebody, that's the worst. Maybe they're trying to hurt somebody. Maybe they were mad and mishandled something because they were mad. But the sinful, I lost control of my temper. I used my anger and I destroyed something. That is the most upsetting to us as parents, but it's also the easiest to deal with because it's like, hello, you're in sin. There are consequences. We're going to deal with that.
Yeah, and that's something which, particularly with boys, because I think anger is an ongoing problem with males. And it's something that we've really tried to emphasize with our boys growing up is that their strength was given to them to provide for others and to protect others and not to express their anger and outrage. Yes. And so we made it a rule and an expectation in our house. If you are angry, you are not allowed to reach out to do anything physical, either to do something physical to your brother or to punch the wall or to slam a door or to throw something across the room. That was something which we really corrected and, singled out to say, look, if you're angry, you need to put your hands in your pockets and take a deep breath and let's talk it out and let's, deal with this. However, if you've got an incident, I think you do have to deal with it right then to say, all right, you did this out of anger. This was a willful act. It was intentional. And guess what? It's sinful. And we've got to correct that.
Yeah, you need discipline and they need discipline and they need to make restitution.
So that's one thing. That's one level.
Kind of the other extreme is the child who really is not at fault. They weren't doing anything unusual. They weren't being careless or foolish. It just happened. Maybe they hit something on their way by. It was purely an accident. That's what happened this morning.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anything. She wasn't doing anything wrong.
No, she wasn't.
She opened the refrigerator.
She wasn't jerking the refrigerator around or slamming doors or anything.
No, but wow, the crash and the disaster. But there was.
Yeah.
She was not involved. In that case, we just need to get control of our own feelings and attitude, because it's tempting, especially if something was broken that we were fond of, to get angry when it would be completely unjust.
No, in fact, in that kind of situation, it's not uncommon, I think, for the first reaction to really need to be to comfort the perpetrator, if you will.
Yes, it's okay, honey. It's all right.
Say, are you okay? Did you hurt yourself? Yes. And that's kind of like if your child has a fender bender in your car and they call and say there's been an accident, your first reaction should be, are you okay?
Yes.
Not, what have you done to my car? But in a smaller thing with younger kids that are not driving yet, you need to make sure that the victim, you're not the only victim in this. Okay, so you got the unintentional one that just something happens.
In which case, you know what? Suck it up.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. It's not even just to require them to pay for it or to apologize, because they didn't mean to do anything.
I think it is appropriate to say, look, I know you didn't mean to do it. Come on, let's clean it up together.
Yes, let's clean it up together.
Let's take the responsibility.
Because there's natural consequences. Yeah. Or to say, I know that you didn't mean this, but you need to tell your brother you didn't mean it. Mm-hmm. You need to say, I am so sorry this got broken. I really did not mean it. Which can feel unjust to the person who was involved, because you say, it wasn't my fault. No, but you need to express that. You need to make peace here.
And that's a tough lesson to give your kids. And that's something we have to try to teach our kids, that there's times when you will hurt somebody. You either hurt their thing or you hurt them, and you didn't intend to, and you would not have done it if you could have avoided it, but something happened. Guess what? You were still the agent that caused some discomfort. And so it's a right thing for you to say, I am so sorry that I stepped on your foot. I didn't see you and I didn't mean to, but I am so sorry because I know that I caused you an injury here.
And that's different from the apology that says I was wrong, but it still says I am sorry.
That I'm sympathetic.
And I really didn't mean to.
Right. So
more problematic is the in-between.
The in-between.
Like the child who just seems to break things wherever they go, and they're kind of careless, and they're not super careful about things, and things get destroyed or broken. I remember one child who went through 3 math books in the course of 1 year.
Yes.
The first time I replaced the math book, we had a serious talk, and I explained how expensive that was, and explained that they need to be more careful where they left it, and what they did with it. But I didn't require them to pay for it, because I didn't think there was any malice. It was just foolishness.
Right.
The second time, he got to pay for the $55 math book,
which is a fortune for a
lot of
child
money for an 11-year-old. Yes,
that is a huge
yes. So that takes a lot of discernment, dealing with that middle ground, and probably our initial response should be grace,
right? Because
we make mistakes too, and they are in an age. Typically, you see this with preteens. They are in an age where they make a lot of mistakes. Their brains aren't working right, and they really aren't working right.
Right.
They're changing. And the executive functions are messed up, and carelessness is just a lot easier at that stage than not carelessness.
They are not, they're not totally aware of themselves or their surroundings, which, and I think it is just to call them to concentrate and pay attention.
Yes.
But privately to say that's going to be hard for them to do. They may not be able to live up to that for a while, but still to say that's an expectation. You need to concentrate. You need to remember to shut the gate when you go out, or you need to remember to turn off the whatever.
So first response is grace, explanation, lots of reminders.
Right.
And then if it continues, and particularly if you see a pattern of carelessness, then it's time to introduce some natural consequences.
And there's some things too, which sometimes you look at a child who's got a destructive history, let's say. Sometimes you look at them and say, okay, can I change something in their environment so this isn't going to happen? Can I put something out of reach of that toddler?
Yes.
You learn that one real quick. Or say, maybe I need to take that valuable object off display until we get something out of control.
Or maybe I need to send two of them to
Mhm.
deal with the animals and make sure that the gate is closed.
Right. Because sometimes we need to help make it easier for them
To
to do the right
recognize that
thing.
they're in a time that
Mhm.
they're in an error likely situation.
Right.
They're in a time when they're likely to make mistakes.
Right.
But it is appropriate to begin to introduce some consequences, like the child who lost the second math book,
Mhm.
and say, you know what, we'll hunt for a used one. We'll try
Yeah.
to do this as cheaply as possible.
Mhm.
I'll front you the money, but
Right.
it needs to cost because I need you to have some commitment here.
And that cost may be a financial cost to replace it. It may be a cost in time and bother,
I think this child
to
worked
say,
off a lot of it.
I mean, to say, okay, you broke this, and so you're going to have to repair it, and I'm going to
Yes.
take the time here to show you how to do this and work
Yes.
with. But you're going to learn how to replace the glass in a window now,
That's right.
and use it as an opportunity to teach as well as to correct. Let's say,
Yes.
yeah.
So, when you're
Mm.
dealing with an accident-prone child,
Mhm.
you need to get control of yourself first,
Right.
and then you need to triage and find out, is this anger and rebellion?
Hmm.
Is it just a complete accident, or is it that awkward in-between space?
Hmm.
And figure out how to handle it justly to protect your relationship with them.
And make sure that we're not making it more difficult than it needs to be, because there's things that you can do and that you can have around when you have a toddler, when you have an inquisitive child, or when you've got one who's just very clumsy. That maybe there's a time later in life when you can be a little more fragile.
If it's irreplaceable, maybe we put it up.
Right.
We need to make sure that we're doing our part in this too.
Yeah. And also, you know what? Having raised a house full of boys, let's be realistic about who they are, and give them the opportunity to go outside and work off some energy.
Yes.
If you don't want them to wrestle in the living room, let them wrestle in the yard.
That's right.
Give them a chance. Okay.
If you have a preteen in this awkward phase, you may enjoy our book, No Longer Little.
Yes.
You can find it at nolongerlittle.com or at our blog and store at raisingrealmen.com.
That's right. And I hope that you will join us again sometime as we try to take biblical principles into the 21st century family. Until next time, I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye, y'all.
You've been listening to Making Biblical Family Life Practical with Hal and Melanie Young. If you found this program interesting, challenging, and encouraging, why not join us on the web at halandmelanie.com. That's HALANDMELANIE.com. Or follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook/Hal and Melanie or Facebook.com/Raising Real Men. This program is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Join us next week when we'll be back to talk about making biblical family life practical. Until then, thank you and God bless you for listening.